Thank you very much for that introduction. It's great to be here. Barcelona is one of my favourite places in the world. I want to do three things this morning. I want to share with you an approach to how we might tackle some of these big, complex challenges that we've just heard about. I then want to talk about how brands themselves can be what I would call system innovators, and I'll describe what I mean by system innovation in a moment. And then I'd like to give you all a sense of what you can do in your roles, be that within a brand, within a wider business, civil society, government, what you can all do to scale up impact. I'll talk about why I think scaling up is so important in a moment. First test, see if this works. Yes, hooray! I'm very conscious that some of you will not have heard of me, nor of my organisation Forum for the Future. All you need to know is that we're here to create a sustainable future. And we do that by working in partnership with business, with government, with wider civil society. And for a long time, we were based purely in the UK. Then 5 years ago, we took the bold step, well, it felt bold to us, to set up in the US of A, and then since then, we have offices, very small, in Mumbai and in Singapore. And we work in two main ways. We put sustainability into the heart of a business. So these are just three of the organisations with whom we've been working with for many years now. And Kingfisher is here today as Brico Depot, where we take sustainability, take these big, complex environmental and social issues, and work out how a business can respond to this in a way that creates value, but also creates innovation, and helps these businesses become part of this pursuit of a sustainable future. But what we found 5, 8 years ago were these leaders were hitting the limits of what they could achieve on their own. And so more latterly, what we've done is pull together organisations that share common challenges, bring them together in innovation coalitions and tackle some of these big issues. So we've looked at the future of shipping. We're doing a lot of work right now in the cotton industry. Retail Horizons was a study looking at the future of retail in the US and how sustainability might lend itself to really show a different pathway for value creation in retail, and so on. We've heard this already a number of times this morning, but if you're in any doubt, the challenges we face, not only are they complex, they're also systemic, and they're too big for any one organisation, any one part of society to tackle alone. So I couldn't agree more with Teresa. We need business, government, civil society, NGOs. We all have a role to play, which means we need to think system. And so I would say that the first step in understanding how you respond to these complex challenges is to understand that actually we are parts of a system. And a system is really a configuration of parts. And the focus moves from understanding these individual components to understanding how do they all fit together. And I'm sure our next speaker, Paul, might have something to say about Mud jeans from Levi's. But Mud's a really interesting business in that Bert Van Son, who set up the business back in 2008, understood that the cotton industry, the textiles industry, it's very volatile. Prices of cotton go up and down. There's all sorts of sustainability issues. And that he understood that in order to really deliver a sustainable business, it was going to be important to keep hold of the material for as long as possible. And then he thought, well, actually, the best way of doing that, to keep hold of the material for as long as possible, is not actually to sell it in the first place, but to lease it. And so the supply chain for Mud jeans, you might draw it like this. So we go from taking the raw material, we process it, we create an end product, we sell it, and then we loop back and we return it. But actually, it doesn't look like this. It looks much more like this. In other words, supply chains are not linear. There's not a natural progression from production to processing to use to end of life. What we actually are dealing with are value networks. So if we start to think system, when we look at supply chains, we begin to understand actually to make a leasing model like Mud Jeans work, we need to think about ways of creating new value, ways of exchanging knowledge, skills, in all sorts of different ways. And when we start to think of a supply chain as a value network, we then begin to understand new pathways for value creation. And then we begin to think about new business models. And I would say that one of the reasons why the circular economy has not yet mainstreamed, despite our desire for it to mainstream and despite lots of technological innovation, is that business models haven't caught up yet. The business models haven't scaled. But actually, if you begin to think about value networks, if you apply your systems lens to a value chain, then you begin to see how you might create new pathways to value creation. And we begin to see a new business model begin to emerge. And that might offer real opportunities for scaling up the circular economy. So that's the first thing we need to do, is to think system, not linear. And then the second thing we really all need is an understanding of how change happens. When Sandra invited me to speak at the conference, she said, you need to share your change model. And I was a bit nervous because it's a graph. Wait for it. It is a graph. And this is about brands. But actually, I think it is really important for us to understand how change actually happens. And so we have a 6-step change model, which is something that we've articulated at Forum through the work that we've done, both with individual organizations, but with sector-wide collaborations. It's not very complicated. It looks a lot like other change models, but it really helps us understand where do we want to intervene as an organization. And more critically, it helps our business partners, our civil society partners, understand where they need to play. So this is a change model, and the change could be changing your organizational structure. It could be developing a sustainable organization. It could be changing an individual department. It could be changing an entire sector, or as the way we use it oftentimes is defining a new mainstream where sustainability is commonplace. It depends where you draw your boundary of that system. But broadly speaking, 6 steps, and step 1 is experiencing the need for change. How many of you have been into a meeting where you've had this brilliant idea and you've tried to sell it and you get what we call in the UK dead eyes? There's no enthusiasm at all. It's really hard to create significant change if people haven't experienced a need for change. And oftentimes that's about looking into the future. That's why we at Forum use a lot of futures tools and techniques. And it's also about seeing and believing. But step 1 on the journey to significant change is to experience that need. And it's why, generally speaking, government-backed behavior change campaigns don't work, because you can't legislate the need for change. It's a personal thing. So that's step 1 on the journey. Step 2 is then diagnosing that system. And it could be your department, it could be your organization, it could be wherever you decide you want to make a real change. And this is about understanding where are those levers, and Jose talked about levers earlier, that if you were to pull them, you'd get really wide-range systemic change. And we've heard already that one of the levers that we could pull is actually valuation techniques. At the moment, we run our economy as if nature was free, and if social assets were free. Neither of them are free. There's a value to each of these assets. And so if we want to create a sustainable economy, then one of the levers we could pull is how we value things. So we diagnose a system, find those levers, and then we create pioneering practice. And this is where innovation comes in. And this is what business is brilliant at doing. Business is really good at innovating. And again, government not so great at innovating, can be good, but generally speaking, this is where business really comes into its own. And in terms of ecosystem valuation, these are all the experiments around forest-backed bonds, all these ways of harnessing the value of natural assets to stay there, and in the case of forest-backed bonds, to act as a sink. You then need to create a tipping point, and this is about gaining momentum. And then this is where government really comes into their own. Government needs to create the policy framework to sustain a transition, to set the new rules of the market, to create a new mainstream. And so if you understand how change happens, then you can decide as a business, as a brand, as an NGO, as government, where to focus your efforts in order to create significant change. So step 2 then, alongside thinking system, having a value network, is having a change model. System innovation. What do I mean by that? Well, system change happens throughout this curve, and clearly it's not linear. It moves around like that. But system innovation is where you have a set of intervention. So it might be public policy, working with a behaviour change campaign, working with innovation to shift an entire system. And that's what I mean by system innovation. And the major moments for system change are between diagnosing the system and creating a tipping point. That's all very well. I came here to listen about brands. You're thinking to yourself, who is this woman telling me about systems thinking and change models? Be patient. The point is that brands can act as system innovators. And our work would suggest that there are 3 ways in which they do that. The first is that brands are really brilliant at giving people something they didn't know that they wanted. So the question becomes, how might brands make sustainability the next desirable thing? How might brands create this notion of a sustainable future being something that we really, really want? And the poster child, if you will, for leading the consumer is Apple. None of us asked for an iPhone. None of us asked for all this gadgetry that we've got, but we've all got it because what Steve Jobs did so well is he imagined a very different future with a very different use of technology and then gave it to us. So how might brands give us sustainable living? Then number 2, the second way in which brands can really act as system innovators is to connect with research and development. Particularly in many large organizations, you've got the R&D laboratory in one part of the business, people in lab coats talking very scientifically, bamboozling others. And then you've got the brand folk, really cool, they're in the marketing department, and they don't really talk to one another, usually. But what happens if you can really use the brand as a superhighway into the R&D department and really bring that innovation to market really quickly? So the second way in which brands can act as system innovators is connecting with R&D insights to really spark sustainable innovation. And I'm happy to say my example here is a project we've been working with on Mallorca with the University of Barcelona. It's very exciting. So this is a project that we've been running with Ecova, who some of you will know were one of the pioneers in green laundry products, detergents and so forth. And then about 3 years ago, Ecova said, well, where do we go next? Because actually there's lots of green cleaning products now. What's the next big thing for us? And so we did a futures project with them called Clean Horizons, where we scanned into 2025 and said, okay, what are the different possible futures for Ecova, and how might Ecova harness those futures insights to create real innovation today? And what was clear by looking into 2025 was this was a world very low on resources, and a world where you had hyper-transparency, and a world where localism had really taken hold. And so it became clear that Ecova needed to experiment on proper closed-loop production. And so we chose Mallorca because it is an island, got huge demand for cleaning products, which are often imported in. And we asked the question, which was, how might we use local waste products, so byproducts of olive groves, to create a sustainable soap? This is now being prototyped. We're waiting to get to the next stage. But it's just an example of how looking to the future, getting those innovation insights, and then using your R&D capacity at a local level can be really breakthrough. And then thirdly, the third way in which brands can act as system innovators is to shape their external context. Koan talked earlier about the power and the reach of brands. Despite the fact that levels of trust have gone down in recent years, brands still have an enormous ability to influence their external environment and to pull levers that actually others, governments in some cases, can't pull. And so brands can create the conditions for a sustainable future. And my example here is a project that we're running in the UK. In the UK, energy bills are going up, and we're using more and more energy in our homes, and it's a significant contributor to our carbon emissions, which clearly is the UK. They're not that big, but they're still significant. And so what we did was pull together a group of businesses to try and change the external context to make people love their energy and use less of it. Now, you might be thinking, well, why would a retailer want to do that? Well, one of the lead partners was Kingfisher, so the UK equivalent of Brico Depot, B&Q, who sell energy efficiency kit. So they sell the ways in which you might make your home more energy efficient. And so this is a really nice example of brands coming together, and it needed them to come together because one brand wouldn't have been able to change the conversation, and saying, love your energy, use less, pay less, and what that then does is create a market for the energy efficiency goods and services that B&Q sells. So there's a virtuous circle here in which businesses influence the external context, create the conditions that could shift us towards greater sustainability, but do so in a way that creates business value. And it's that win-win part of the jigsaw that I think we're only just beginning to understand. If that isn't enough in terms of 3 ways in which brands can act as system innovators, the third thing I said I wanted to do was talk about scaling up. I showed you this lovely chart a moment ago and showed you the box where we had system innovation. But the heart of the current challenge is scaling up. It's my view, and I think others may agree, that there's lots of innovation out there. There is lots and lots of innovation. We have the technology, we have the understanding, the capability to deliver solutions at scale for sustainable development, but they're not scaling. And so what we did, we began this project 2 years ago, we only published it earlier this year, is say, how do we harness the market to get scaling up? The bad news is that we don't have time to reinvent capitalism if we're going to solve the challenges that we face in the time available. So the question then becomes, how do we make capitalism work for sustainability? How do we harness market mechanisms to achieve impact at scale? That's just another way of showing where that fits. And a lot of information here, you can download it all from our website. But effectively, we've identified 8 levers that you can pull in the market that gives you impact at scale. They come in 3 broad buckets. You can generate new solutions, that's the innovation piece. But that on its own isn't enough. What you have to do is to show market viability. So you have to provide market access, scaling solutions. You have to provide business models that can replicate. You have to re-engineer the supply chain beyond you. So you have to show viability and show that the market solutions can actually work. But that also isn't enough, because what you have to do is do advocacy. You have to go out and tell people that this can work and create advocacy platforms, often pre-competitive. And one of the reasons why I think we haven't seen scaling up of innovation is that we haven't been deliberate enough about which market levers we're pulling and when. And then back to the brands. It's a very slow clicker. I talked about the 3 ways in which brands might act as system innovators. Well, number 1 is creating end-user demand. That's a really important market lever to pull. Number 2 is by sparking innovation to create new products and services. That's another market lever that needs pulling. And then number 3, by shaping their external context, brands can act as advocacy platforms. So in other words, brands acting as system innovators can help scale innovations and get us to a tipping point where then government probably will step in and create the right public policy framework. So for those of you from brands here today, I'd like you to think about how can you unleash your brand as a system innovator? What can your brand do to lead the consumer to create this notion of sustainability, but don't call it that, whatever you do, this notion of more sustainable living? How can you make that really desirable? How can you also use your brand to go and speak to the R&D innovation folk and be that superhighway between innovation and activation in the marketplace? And how might your brand enable the external context? 3 ways in which brands can absolutely act as system innovators. And for all of us, I guess sort of 3 messages really. Do you understand your value network? Have you worked out what your value network looks like? Have you figured out where the knowledge transfer happens? Where are the new opportunities for generation of pathways to value creation? So understand your value network, map it out, look at it through a system lens. Number 2, understand your change model. Are you about innovating? Are you about scaling? Or are you about sustaining the transition? Understand where you need to focus your efforts to create that new mainstream. And then number 3, it's really understanding what of those market mechanisms are you going to pull to achieve collective impact at scale? What's tended to happen in the past is that individual organizations, governments, and business have been pulling these market mechanisms, but blindly. There's no additionality. So how might you enter into new collaborations where between a collaboration of business, government, civil society, you're pulling all of those 8 levers to deliver collective impact at scale? So 3 things I'd love you to do. And then just finally, to echo a theme we have heard this morning. We do face unprecedented challenges. You only have to look into the news to see that for yourself. And you could be lured into thinking these are too big. They're not too big, and I've hopefully given you a way of breaking them down. So we do face a period of unprecedented challenge. However, as Kawan showed on her slide earlier, my own view is that we face a period of unprecedented opportunity. We are incredibly creative, intelligent beings. We need to unlock that creativity, unlock that innovation. And I absolutely believe that system innovation and scaling up are the 2 ways in which we might deliver the solutions that we need at scale and on time. Thank you very much.